Welcome back. Again, my name is Bruce Wood. I'm the moderator for the Partner Agencies panel, and I'd like to introduce the panel. Today we've got Patrick Dowd from the Office of Public Defense. To his left, we have Joan Harry, Department of Corrections, Family Services Unit Manager. We've got Peter Kay from the Attorney General's Office. And to my left, we've got April Rivera of the CASA Guardian Ad Litem Program of Seattle. And last but not least, we've got Greg Williamson, who works for the Office Superintendent of Public Instruction, former coordinator of children of incarcerated parents, rather. And glad to have you guys here, and thank you very much. I'd like to go around the table, and if you could just briefly just say a couple of words about the agency and what you do. And Patrick, I'd like to start with you.
Well, thank you, Bruce. I manage the Parent Representation Program with the Office of Public Defense. This is a state-funded program which provides legal representation to parents in dependency proceedings. And by implementing the right to counsel for indigent parents, and perhaps incarcerated parents in particular have even a greater need for effective representation, as their ability to participate in the dependency process, court hearings, etc., is somewhat limited.
And I head up, as you mentioned, the Family Services Unit for the Department of Corrections. And the Department of Corrections is committed to providing family-centered programs and services. It's important for us to assist in that family reunification process and provide support relative to family needs.
Fantastic.
Yes, thank you. I'm Peter Kay with the Attorney General's Office. The Attorney General's Office represents state government, and in my particular case represents DSHS in children's dependency and termination actions. Those are cases in where there's alleged parental abuse, child neglect issues, and the children or child has been removed from the parent's care and placed in either foster care or relative care. And court-ordered rehabilitative services are required to address the parental deficits to see if the child could be returned to the parent's care. And if those services aren't effective in remedying the deficits, then alternate plans need to be made for that child, whether it's some type of guardianship, adoption, relative care, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Here.
The Court-Appointed Special Advocates Program is a volunteer-based program, and we're appointed to investigate and report back to the court, as well as make a recommendation as to what we have found to be in the children's best interests.
Thank you.
Thanks. I work at the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, and we received 1 year funding for me to participate in this Children of Incarcerated Parents work group and establish some services for children of incarcerated parents. Kathleen Sandy is a peer of mine who works at the state agency, and she also works with institutional educational clients, and between the two of us we answer quite a few questions about children of incarcerated parents.
Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to kind of open this up to a couple of different questions. And the first question I'd like to ask you is, well, what services and supports does your agency offer for families affected by the incarceration of a parent? And start with you.
Well, the role of the parent's attorney is that of both a counselor and as an advocate. As a counselor, the duty of the attorney is to engage the parent, explain their rights, explain the court process, help the client identify realistic goals that the client wishes to pursue, advise the client, give the client the best professional legal advice that the attorney can, and then also keep in mind that it is the client, it's the parent that determines what course of action to take. And that's where the advocacy role comes into play, to advocate for the course of representation as determined by the parent, advocate for the client's stated interests, to protect the client's legal rights. Oftentimes incarcerated parents may have other criminal liability issues that the attorney has to keep in mind. And in that role, at times the attorney as an advocate can be viewed, I think, by other players in the system as slowing the process down, creating problems or confrontation, etc. So I think it's important to keep in mind those dual roles. And then within that is to also balance the collaborative efforts that permeate, I think, the dependency system and that we all strive for, as well as the adversarial process. In those regards, the attorney in dealing with incarcerated parents has to overcome some barriers such as communication, access to the client, creating a situation where the parent can participate effectively within the system, and that can involve obtaining orders for transportation so the client can attend significant court hearings, arranging for a conference call, for example, so a parent might be able to participate in a family team decision-making conference, etc. So these are all things that the attorney has to work on to try to identify what are the barriers that prevent this parent from participating in the system due to his or her incarceration from any other parent that's involved in a dependency, and how can we work together with the department, with the court, with the CASA to overcome some of those barriers and bring that parent's participation into the case process.
Fantastic. I hope you don't mind, but what you were sharing before we sat down here between you and Peter, and the comment was, we've got the same goal. We've got the same goal, and that is to, hopefully what's best for children and families. And I appreciated that comment. The two are generally diametrically, at times, not always, opposed to each other in some ways. So thank you. How about you, John?
What we know is that when we empower the parent, we empower the child to succeed. And we know that families who are connected, that the men and women incarcerated in our facilities are more successful and are less likely to reoffend when they are engaged with their family. And so it's been important that we provide services and support that facilitate communication, that facilitate engagement, that allow folks not only to operate outside the allow them to operate outside the confines of a regular structured visit room. So we have educational services to support parents. We have programs like parent education. We have vocational programs as well, cognitive programs. We spoke about that earlier as well. But programs that help build some tools and put some tools in place to strengthen that family and that core relationship. Visitation is key to that. So when we can get families together and when we can empower parents to play with their children, and they may not have done that before. They may have been so immersed in whatever path that led them to prison that they didn't know how to sit down and engage with a child. And so allowing those sorts of skills to develop, encouraging them, has been real helpful. I've heard a couple of things mentioned today. Opportunity for access to the folks, the men and women who are parents in our facilities is critical and key to that. And so we have folks in our facilities who have responsibility for family-centered programming and services. And those are community partnership program coordinators. We have folks out in the field as well, our family service specialists, that have responsibility for connecting our families to supports and services. And so those folks all work together to really try and, again, empower the families to succeed.
So have you noticed then a measurably increase in the amount of access that these parents have to their children because of this program?
So this is what I would tell you. I would tell you that what we hear from the families is that they love to come in to be able to participate in those sorts of programs. That it does a couple of things. One of the things for children is that they recognize that they're not the only ones. This is a very lonely, lonely space to walk when you have a parent incarcerated. And we've done lots of work with school districts over the years. For about 9 years now, almost 9 years, we've been doing parent-teacher teleconferencing from our prisons. And again, building those partnerships and those linkages have been key. But again, as families come into our facilities, as they participate in programs and services, then they recognize that they're not alone, that there are other folks working in this situation and living with this burden, and it helps them to build a support network. So that's good as well, is giving some very fundamental tools. It's really enriching to sit down and decorate a cookie with your child, and it gives you something to talk about. So, yeah.
Thank you. And so, Peter, I mean, part of the department's job here is we have to provide what's called reasonable efforts in terms of, so I don't know. I mean, could you discuss a little bit of when we work with an incarcerated parents, what's some of the activities that the department does to try to increase access, try to increase connectedness, try to increase those things that we heard from the youth panel earlier and the parents panel before, of contact, case plan. Can you describe your experience and from your role, what's done about it?
Yes, well, all parents, the department has an obligation to assist all parents with services and visitation, irrespective of where they are, whether they're out in the community or they're incarcerated. And when parents are incarcerated, that presents some unique challenges because the resources that are available to that parent are limited. It's through what's available through the Department of Corrections as opposed to other community resources. But there are a few certain benefits in that the individual is easily located. There are other individuals available to assist the social worker in their job. For example, the community corrections officer, the parent's counselor in the prison is a great resource. And those types of individuals can be used to help a social worker perform his or her job in providing the services and the visitation that all parents are entitled to. And so what a social worker can do is work with these other agencies, work with the Department of Corrections to find out what's available in a prison, to develop a case plan that is appropriate for that parent, but also appropriate for the department, because it's not appropriate to develop a case plan that cannot be implemented or provided to that parent, or if it could be provided, it would be at significant additional expense and additional time and resources. In addition to working with visitation services, the other issue is visitation. We just heard an example of the video conferencing with parent-teacher conferences. Similar type of things can be done to encourage parent-child visitation. And so the Department of Corrections, each one of their facilities has various visitation rules that the social worker needs to be aware of so that they can develop a case-appropriate plan. One of the slides in this program, I believe it is slide 45, talks about the need for proactive case planning on the issue of visitation, that this should be used to set a visitation schedule that is workable. Because one of my experiences has been is that if a social worker is not prepared at a court hearing to discuss and present a visitation plan, the court will adopt or enact a visitation plan that's not very appropriate, which could end up being that the social worker or somebody else has to take the child clear across the state for visitation every other week or something. Whereas if some proactive casework had been done, the social worker could come into court and say, this is the plan we have. We're looking at telephone contact maybe every week, video every other week, and then the inmate's grandmother visits her grandson who's incarcerated once a month. And been working with her, she's cleared the background checks, and she is a resource to help transport the child so that this father gets to see his child at least once a month while his own grandmother is visiting him. That would just be one example.
So kind of get out of this box of, well, if the parent is incarcerated near Spokane and the case is out of Seattle, kind of getting out of this, kind of thinking out of the box in terms of what are some really creative ways here we can keep these people at least connected, keep the child connected with that parent in whatever way when it's safe to do so.
Yes,
right? Okay.
And in addition to keeping the parent connected to the child, also starting to try and address some of the parental deficits that caused this parent to come into care. And the social worker has a built-in resource right there through the Department of Corrections, because the Department of Corrections, their goal is to try and end recidivism and address some of the similar problems. And so the social worker has an ally, has a resource there through the Department of Corrections personnel that they can contact to find out what type of services are available in this prison for this inmate, what can the social worker do to assist the Department of Corrections in providing background information that demonstrates, yes, this individual has an active drug and alcohol problem and thus needs some type of counseling or NAAA groups that are available in this institution, or situations like that. And part of also the Attorney General's job in working with the department is similar to what my colleague Mr. Dowd was saying, trying to come up with solutions at case conferences, court settlement matters where we can try and solve the problems of how are we going to provide services and how are we going to provide visitation to address the problems and maintain the contact between parent and child.
Thank you, Peter. April, you're in a very unique kind of role here. You're kind of focused on best interest of the child here.
We are, and one of the things that struck a chord for me when both in the youth panel and when the parents were speaking was that there's this lack of communication that happens on these cases regularly, I think. And I think that one of the unique things that CASA can do, and I think happens regularly, is that all kinds of people call us because we're allowed to call everyone. And we often have contact with family members and with incarcerated parents as well when other people don't seem to be having contact with them. And, you know, with something as simple as a, you know, sort of mass email to the social worker and the AAG and the public defender, we can often get everyone talking about the same issues. And I really think that this is where the CASA's role is going to be in this, is helping to facilitate that communication on a regular basis. And I think that often the public defenders, in fact, sort of get left out of the conversation. And we've been talking a lot at the CASA program about trying to bring them back in, because if the public defenders don't know what their parents are doing, either in terms of services or if they're out of jail in terms of not doing in terms of their services, they really can't adequately represent that parent and advise that parent and counsel them on what they need to be doing and helping to give them a roadmap as well. So I think this, I'm really excited about the idea of us all brainstorming together, and I think hoping it's a regular thing.
Yeah, me too.
That's been, I think, the most interesting and fascinating part for us, is just to be a part of this interagency work over the past year and a half or so. And I know that it goes back further than that between all the agencies, but that's my participation has been just what are the different ways we can solve some of these problems and create knowledge and awareness. So some of the services that OSPI provides to you as a DSHS social worker and to the school folk that you'll be working with is just, we do a lot of referrals. We'll get a call from a parent or from somebody who's an advocate for a student, and we'll immediately be talking with DSHS, Department of Corrections, other partners to try to get the best services available to that child and family. We do some systems improvement work. This interagency committee is one example. There's a data subcommittee. There was a professional development subcommittee. What are the tools we can do to just make systems improvements? I also am lucky to be a member of the learning and teaching support section of the agency where I work. So next to me is the person who does dropout prevention and retrieval. We have the person who does homeless education, foster care, mental health, military families. All of us are there together in the same unit, and so we get a chance to talk about, well, if, for children who've experienced traumatic, adverse childhood experiences, what are the different ways that we can sort of do cross-agency work within our system. Then we do a lot of professional development work, and we've done some things targeted specifically at trauma-sensitive schools. If you make schools more trauma-sensitive for all kids, what are the general messages that you want to be giving, and what are some of the specific and targeted things that you want to be doing for the students who have self-identified as children of incarcerated parents? We do not encourage folks to go into classrooms and ask students, raise your hand if your parent's incarcerated. And yet, when you talk with people, they do know kind of some of the families that are involved. Either it's in the newspaper in a small town, you've got students writing things in their student writing. They will talk with a parent or with a teacher or an administrator or a counselor and just say, this is going on for me. And so once that information is disclosed, what can we do to offer other supports respecting the privacy concerns of everybody involved, but within a school person's role, what can they do to be helpful and supportive? Some of that stuff is just really easy things, like making a little speech at the beginning of the school year about we all of us are affected by different kinds of difficulties and challenges in our family. It might be that your parent is stationed overseas. It might be that you have family illness or health issues. It might be that you've got somebody in your family placed in foster care, or that you are yourself, or in kinship care. It might be that you've got a family member who's incarcerated. There are lots of different things. You might just be having a bad day or have an earache or whatever, but I want you to know that I, as the teacher, am somebody you can come talk to. We have adults here who care about you, and that that kind of focus, right to the young person can be the kind of thing that we help provide.
Well, Greg, I got to tell you, there's some serious silo busting going on here, because as a social worker, my experience was that I felt kind of alone in this. I felt like, wow, judge orders me to make sure the kid has visitation with the parent and arrange it. I didn't realize that there was some pretty serious support around this issue, and I wish I knew then what I know now.
Well, at least from our end, this is all fairly new. I mean, Joan mentioned 9 years of telephone conferences and support for those parent-teacher conferences, and the department has been terrific at doing that with individual school districts. But in terms of our agency's involvement in that, it's been fairly recent. Kathleen precedes me by a little bit, but it's been the last few years. And so we're in that excited place, too. And I think that mostly what I hear from educators is we just don't really know what to do. So my other sort of advice for or hope for social workers is that, much as I would invite educators to go to their local Department of Corrections facility and spend time in those family events on the weekends, the other part is that if social workers already have a great relationship with their school for their case management or the local school in their neighborhood, terrific. If not, to try to merge these cultures is a very significant first step, because teachers will say, I wish I knew. I know I'm serving children of incarcerated parents in my classroom, but I don't know who they are, and I really don't know what to do. And so we're just trying to connect them with the information that DSHS and others are providing.
Well, you answered my second question.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's great, because that's perfect. So very quickly, what can a social worker do? What can DSHS workers do to connect to your services, to connect with your team? I mean, what are ways that you would say, hey, this is... certainly when I was working, you said 9 years. I had no idea this is going on at all. And so how is it that a social worker can connect with these services and supports and connect more broadly with your team? What advice would you give? What would you say?
I want to suggest that folks start by getting familiar with the Department of Corrections website. We have, if you go to our website, there's a link for family and friends. There's a place there where you can do a search if you're looking for a parent that's incarcerated, where you can do a search by name to seek out that parent. You can go to a particular facility's website and you can see the sorts of programs and services that are offered there. So if you've got a parent who you, as a social worker, you want to see them taking some parenting curriculum, and you want to know what that curriculum is about. You want to know that that parent is participating in anger management classes, and that's available. You go to the link for that facility on our website and you can see the programs, the services that are being offered. In addition, talk to the staff. Our staff is these partnerships, the partnership Greg talked about, I too am thrilled to have everybody at the table, because I know what a difference it's made already to our families to have safe places to go in other agencies to get the services and the support that they need, to get questions answered without fear. Sometimes they are afraid to tell you as a social worker something. But it's important for you to have some information about that. It's important for them to have some information about what it means. And so those gates have really been opened significantly in the last few years. So again, go to the website, go to the facility link. Don't be afraid to access that information and contact us and contact our staff to say, hey, what's available for this person? And even if that person doesn't have the resource in front of them at the facility to be able to tell you when the next class is scheduled to start, they know where to go in the facility to get that information. So the dialogue is key, and just having the conversation is opportune. So.
Fantastic.
As far as public defense services, the crucial piece is getting the client appointed, that's incarcerated, appointed an attorney. And for parents that are not incarcerated, that's a pretty smooth process. They appear at court and there's a facilitator there that will get that going. For parents that are incarcerated, it can be a little bit more difficult. And the first point of contact is the DSHS caseworker, when the parent is provided notice of the dependency proceeding that's been initiated, and explaining the steps that the parent needs to do to have an attorney appointed. And sometimes that parent may need some assistance in making sure that happens. The last thing we want to see happen is for the case to progress for several months and that incarcerated parent being hanging out there without representation in the legal process. So that's a big issue. And then there are 4, I think, primary topic areas that I think are ripe for collaboration between a public defense attorney and defense services in the department. And those are, number 1 is information about the child. These parents feel isolated. They feel like they're excluded from the process. And what you don't know is what you'll worry about. And I think parents, a lot of their fears and anxieties can be alleviated by simply knowing the child is in a safe place, the child is in school, the child had a dentist appointment last week and everything's fine. Just that basic information, I think, can go a long way. So making sure that that information is flowing between the department and all parties, including the parent's attorney, and getting to the parent. Identifying a service plan for the parent. Letting the parent know, while you're incarcerated, here are some services that are available to you. It might not address all of the service plan, but it's steps that they can start taking towards achieving their case outcome goals.
Working on some skill building, I mean, as best they can, I mean.
Exactly. Placement issues and identifying relative resources is another area that should be explored with the parent's attorney. And finally, visits. And I think I can pretty much leave it at that. One comment, I think some individuals within the system have a bias against visits occurring in a DOC facility that's antiquated. And I think there's some education within the system that needs to take place.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. Any other words before we turn it over to the audience? Yeah, go ahead.
On that topic of just how do we connect?
Absolutely, yes, okay. Absolutely.
So in addition to these sort of referral, system improvement, professional development things, I am hopeful that I'll just mention a specific tool. So we prepared a Children of Incarcerated Parents Support Program toolkit that has gone to every school district in the state, and actually the state of Oregon is doing a similar thing now based on this. And it's just got some of the things that we've probably talked about, or some of the things that are on the resource list here. It's got a document about trauma-sensitive schools. It's got videos from the Girl Scouts Beyond Bars program. It's got information from the Bill of Rights folks for children incarcerated. If people aren't familiar with this book, All Alone in the World by Nell Bernstein, that's something that now is at every single school district, 295 school districts in Washington State. And what the local social workers should know is that that's been sent to the superintendents, and that there's an opportunity for not only school district staff, but other community folk to have conversations with school boards to get this issue the kind of attention that it deserves. I mentioned these other client populations that we serve, and whether you look at homeless students or students in foster care or whatever, the potential of the numbers of children of incarcerated parents is much greater. So whether it's the 27,000 that Kathy Russell's work has identified exist, or the potentially 90-some thousand that may be out there, these numbers are rather large and staggering. And again, the issues are not specific just to children of incarcerated parents, but lots of students who have experienced trauma can benefit from a discussion that says, let's get aware about some of these issues, and then how do we do some cross-agency work. I'll just...
I got to get me
please,
one of
sir.
the books.
Oh, okay. I was going to see if there are other things. Just one last thing I want to just mention in terms of what the social workers can help do is look for opportunities to help take advantage of and build upon the resiliency of those children themselves. There's been a lot of talk today about involving the client themselves as a way of empowering them to have some efficacy and agency over the decisions that affect them, and doing that with the young people. There was a young woman at last winter who we were able to get into a leadership capacity with a large group of students whose parents had been sent overseas in the military. And so they're going through all the abandonment issues and the re-entry when that parent comes home and all the different stress and trauma and loss and grief that goes on. And we were able to have one of the young women from the Girl Scouts Beyond Bars program go and help us provide training to these other students and do facilitation. And she was able to sort of maximize her own leadership capabilities, and her resiliency comes right out. But she needs that opportunity. And just because we can't talk about these kids and we can't know about these kids, that can be a real challenge. And there are ways to do it. And it comes back to asking that young person, would you like to be involved? We've done these trauma-sensitive workshops where young people have talked directly to educators, and then we ask them to send us their comments, and we're preparing materials, voices from the students themselves, telling us, the adults, what they'd like to see happen better.
Thank you guys so much. Very, very.
Thank you.